Thank you very much for the introduction. My session today would be covering HR strategies to overcome current challenges. Just to go through real quick what we're going to be going through, I'll do a brief introduction of who I am, which has already been done, and then where I'm coming from and to share this information. And then we'll go into the considerations and main challenges that we see. Possible HR strategies that we can use during this time or maybe post also. And then I'll probably end up just discussing briefly with you the HR practices or the best practices that are in the market nowadays, okay? So obviously my name is May. And as mentioned, I do have experience in the region. I've dealt with different aspects of HR. I've been with the Pro-Capita since the inception. Now, Pro-Capita basically is a regional consulting firm that has come together to include many different service lines, including management services, consulting services. We do HR mainly. We carry on implementation of these services through co-sourcing or even outsourcing in certain situations, specific pillars of the HR department, development obviously of different areas, recruitment advisory. Now as a partner, I actually head the recruitment advisory services and in line with everything else that is there. So once again, we've got plenty of professionals working with 400 plus clients. We have strategic alliances. Our main floor of or area of work is the regional area. We do have offices in Kuwait, UAE, and Jordan, and we develop continuously with clients the best solutions for them. So, and during this time, the reason I did this introduction is during this time, we do have a lot of clients that have asked for advice. We've done a lot of R&D on a global basis, on regional, on local standpoint of view, and we've taken a lot of clients hand in hand in helping them find a solution that would be best fitting for their HR and long-term and short-term solutions. Okay, so if we look at generally what we should be looking at during the duration of this crisis has been up, for discussion. We've heard initially when it started, it'll be done in a month, and then all of a sudden it's been prolonged for another month and so forth. So from day one, when we started thinking and seeing the COVID-19 problem, we looked at it with different scenarios, assuming that we'll be functioning by end of June as scenario one. Scenario two would be September, things will be running smoother. The economics of the countries would be more stabilizing, or we're just going to have to wait until the end of the year and just forget that 2020 even happened. All right, so taking into consideration on different scenarios, you actually have to identify how you would be impacted. So looking at your business, you have to look at, am I impacted negatively or positively? Okay, so there are industries based on global and local and regional studies that have shown that they've positively been impacted. Looking at hypermarkets, they're still functioning. They're recruiting. Food distributors functioning, recruiting. Factories, again, sometimes with shutdown and lockdown, you have different people, different factories working. I've heard of new brands coming up for sanitization that I didn't even know existed. Again, food production is another thing. We had a situation in Kuwait where there was a lockdown for a certain area, and the flour mills were down. So we had the national forces come in and run the machines. So you'll find that there are a lot of industries that have been positively impacted. ISPs, internet, everything that's online is up and running. And if it wasn't up and running, now it's in full force. Okay, so these are the areas that or industries that have been positively impacted. Looking at our businesses in general, you have categorizations. You've got businesses that have been slightly impacted, moderately impacted, and severely. And I've just listed a few of them generally, but if you look at the areas that like luxury brands, automotive, sports centers, dine-in restaurants, these have been severely impacted from day one, especially when governments have taken action in closing down areas and institutions and organizations. Then you've got areas where, moderately manufacturing, for instance, the media, you still have media going on, you still see billboards, you still see digital media going on. Agriculture, again, it's food production, local, again, is big now. And then areas that have been slightly impacted would be construction, because construction has to continue. Residential real estate, obviously nobody's going to be out of their homes. They're still going to be paying their rent. Telecoms are, we used to be stuck to our phone. I think we're stuck to our phone now 48 in the 24 hours. Getting information, being online, communicating, whether work related or even family related. I don't think I've spoken to my mom on FaceTime as much as I have in this past couple of months. All right. Pharmaceuticals again. So depending on the business line that you are in and the impact that you have, these are the things that you would be looking at and considering when you're looking at your different strategies. All right. Another thing that you need to keep in mind and be aware of, the concerns. They differ from individuals to companies. So HR departments would be thinking on business level side. They obviously they'll be thinking of employees, but it would be more how it's related to the businesses. Employees, on the other hand, would be looking at financial security. Is my company sound? Can they continue paying me salaries? What's going to happen to my family? How can I work if I'm on remote areas? I'm in lockdown. Can I leave? Can I not leave? What happens if I get in contact with someone that's infected, and so forth. So these are different concerns that unfortunately are quite different, percentage-wise even, where we need to take into consideration and compromise on both sides, whether we're employees or we're part of the business leadership, okay? Main challenges that you'll see on generally on global and even local and regional of business continuity. Again, due to the impact that this crisis has caused us, we look at how long can we sustain the business, the liquidity, cash flows, how long can the employees be with us, Then we look at the work arrangements. Can they come in, depending on the area that you are or the country you're at? For instance, in Kuwait, we don't have everybody on lockdown. We have certain areas that are on lockdown. So some people can go to work, some people cannot go to the office. Some countries are complete lockdown. You're not even able to move. Like for instance, in Jordan, you can't get in your car to maneuver. Then you have another thing that's very important, and usually this is something that's very important to HR, which is employee communication and engagement. At this time, with having people in different areas, with different mental status, with different emotionally affected, the communication is core. So these are the challenges that you have. How do I communicate? How do I stay on top of things? How do I get to the employees to engage with me? Okay. In addition to that, employees get concerned, as mentioned, on the workplace policies. How do I get in on time? How are the hourly rates, and so forth. Also, another thing is, if you do have your offices up and running, then what are preventive measures that you've actually done? Certain countries have actually taken strong measures, like the government has. Like for instance in Kuwait, fingerprints, as soon as it started, no fingerprint machines allowed. So there are different challenges that we face. I've just mentioned a few, or these are the most common that we've seen and heard of and dealt with different clients, okay? Now, if we are looking at the different HR strategies, all the concerns that I've mentioned, all the challenges that I've mentioned are there. And the other thing that we always need to keep in mind is we are handling things now, okay? So it's the priority is for what's happening now. Although we may be looking at that, I will also touch on post-COVID-19 strategies that you can start thinking of now, or at least prepare for. So let's start off with the short-term HR strategies. Okay, things that you can actually take into consideration are obviously having, you know, response and action plans that would align with the current situation. Again, based on the severity, based on the different scenarios, you need to look at these. You have to have plan A, plan B, and plan C. You know, thinking of when the entire crisis will be over. Looking into remote workspace and digital transformation measures. Okay, some companies are digitally aware. Some companies I know, on large companies, even multinationals, are in the process of completing their digital transformation. Okay. Hence, you'll find that you need to set measures for that. You need to put guidelines for people to work from home remotely. Usually when you're in the office, you go by hour, you know, I'm going to do this by this hour and so forth. You need to be more project-based, so more object-oriented if you want, okay? Then we need to look at communication policies. How often do we meet? Team collaborations, these personal safety and health guidelines, cost efficiency, you know, how can we be cost effective? Looking at distributed authority, okay, specifically for the HR department, okay? Let me go into a little bit more deeply into each area, okay? So looking at response options, now after working with clients again and looking into the market, reading into the different solutions that people have come up with, and based on the level of negative impact that the businesses have faced. Obviously, I'm not going to mention anything on the positive impact because they should be sustaining the economy at this time. But slightly impacted companies, based on the scenarios that they've considered, have come up with different options. Now, this is very generic. I couldn't include all industries and details, but there is a report that we have online that you can download and look into more detail. But slightly impacted on first level would be you know, companies that actually would use remote workspace using tools such as Zoom, for example, Blue Jeans, Skype, and whatever and so forth. You notice that because they were able to work remotely and they weren't affected on operational level on a high end. You'll notice that they didn't touch employee allowances and benefits. So everything is status quo as prior to pre-COVID-19. You'll see that sometimes companies who had regular reviews coming up in March and April, that they've suspended increments for this time or any status changes. So obviously, moving forward, not knowing where things are happening, a lot of times companies should be doing that, and employees need to understand that it's, at the end of the day, it's for sustaining the monthly salaries and so forth, because we really didn't know, or we still don't know when this whole thing will end. Okay, then for looking into, for example, if we have another 3-4 months ahead of us for things to be up and running again, we look into a lot of people plan their annual leaves. So we suggested, and if you have a planned annual leave, go ahead and take it. Don't stop annual leave just because this is the situation. So moving forward with implementing annual leave in coordination with employees, obviously. For larger conglomerates, for companies that have a lot of multitasking, the sharing of human capital across departments, divisions, companies, sister companies, and so forth is very useful, because at least you get your employees working, although it might be in different fields, it would be gaining skills in these areas. For long-term scenarios where end of December comes and we're still in the same situation, then we recommended, or some companies have actually put plans where they would actually do partial unpaid leave. So not fully, but partially, a few days here, a few days there per month. Okay. For moderately impacted, obviously you can take into consideration everything that was for slightly impacted. And please note that some businesses might have started on the slightly impacted and have moved into the category of moderately impacted, and we've seen that happen. We've seen companies halting sales commissions, okay, or delaying the payout, depending on the industry that they're working in. At this stage, companies could activate unpaid leaves, okay, so partially or completely, depending on the different industry and again, the lockdown situation. If they're working, they're not working remotely, and so forth. So salary reduction. Again, this depends on the country that you're in. It depends on the regulations. So you need to work hand in hand with the legal team, obviously, on that. And when you do salary reductions, you do keep in mind that you need to take into consideration the different grade levels. So you would then you wouldn't do a salary reduction from lower grades similar to the higher grades. Okay, so these are things that you can do. For severely impacted, those businesses that have been shut down from day one or within the second or third month were requested to shut down. Again, you can look into the moderately and slightly impacted options, and then you would look into suspension of allowances and benefits. Again, salary reductions, depending on the legality and regulations. There are ways to work it out, and you've got certain governments have supported that. Kuwait has not come up with something at this time, but I'm sure they will. As you've noticed, for people who, for instance, are in Kuwait, initially they gave a full vacation, paid leave for everyone, and then now it's a stress phase. So you can see that the government is a bit more understanding towards the employees nowadays. Okay, last thing that you could be looking at would be termination of employee services. Although we don't highly recommend that at this time because it has repercussions on the cash flow and liquidity. And if you do have to do that due to the low cash flow or low performance on the business, I would recommend, we usually say, keep a rehiring policy there in place, just in case, because you really don't want to lose people that you've worked with and developed and given skills to, right? So that's on this area. Now, whether we like it or not, remote working is going to be the new normal. So a lot of people would be still working remotely. We're in a region where a lot of people traveled on business trips, on vacations, are stuck outside. So they have to do a lot of remote work. Some people are in areas, distant areas that would not be able to enter into the certain cities and districts. So we need to obviously create measures that would align with the remote working. So either check on team applications, communication tools, standardize them, put guidelines, guide the people on how to to work with the fact of remotely submitting information, working in teams, and so forth. Okay, so it's very important because having employees and staff be efficient and productive is critical for their mental and emotional stand also. So you need them to be efficient and productive. So the more that you can actually guide them and teach them in a system on how to handle things through the different measures and on the different strategies, the more that you're going to get out of remotely based stuff. Now, also during this time, flexible meeting schedules. Usually you have an 8 to 5 job. Now with different areas being locked down, permissions for leaving to get groceries and so forth at different times, you need to have flexibility on meetings. So it's no longer a 9 to 5 job. It's a lot of meetings that we hold, even with our clients. It's after, for example, lockdown times or curfew times. All right, so flexibility is very important in these measures, and it has to be done from the leaders down to the lowest employees. Okay, For digital transformation, again, digital work is very important. Data is very critical. The only way to get data is remotely nowadays. So if you haven't started, you need to start. If you're already in the phase of transforming digitally, then you need to fast forward and complete whatever you have in preparation for what's coming after post COVID-19. Okay. Now, also for HR, I always say, you know, you need to work with other departments. You can't come up with a solution by yourself. It's all about team effort, working closely. So when it comes to the digital, trust that your IT team will be able to help you in finding the best solutions in alignment with what you're looking for. Okay. Policies on communication and collaboration. Obviously, you have to be empathetic. It's very important that you understand how people are working and the way that they're living. I've seen people come closer to their neighbors, which is something that you see in the movies in the 60s. People are more connected now than they are before. People are, I've received calls from people that I haven't heard from for a long time back. So even whether it be clients, family, you know, so make sure that you keep that close-knit family, and you need to have policies to do that. So, you know, regular team building activities, regular coffee breaks, for example, meeting times. You know, these are things that you need to take into consideration when you're looking at how to deal with your employees. You know, listen to them, listen to their concerns. Different areas that you can help. Maybe regularly you wouldn't get involved. We're getting involved in personal day-to-day lives of people, of our staff, more than we used to do previously. So take that into your policies, take that into consideration when you're putting your policies together. Okay, and then also ensure that you move fast. So you have to have a team that is on the lookout on what's happening, on the latest updates obviously from the correct sources, and have teams just reacting and coming up with ideas in order to solve different situations. Because obviously now we're a bit more trained on accepting new regulations and laws and things that's happening, but we need to move fast when it comes to reflecting that into our business. Okay. Health and safety measures. Again, I'm sure businesses have people that are in the front line so ensure that you have continuous health measures, whether if it's in the office or if they're doing their work you know, at the field. Consider social distancing, social etiquette, even you know, have these policies ready so that people are aware that you know, client meetings, for instance, candidate meetings, that we had, I had to tell people, I'm sorry, I just can't do the meeting. So let's do it virtually. Let's do it this way. So a lot of things. Shaking hands. I haven't shaken anybody's hand in the past since, I don't know, Feb. So it might be common sense, but these measures have to be put in place. Some people would you know, just not notice, you know, that they're doing it. But if you put the measures down and you guide them through it and let them know that this is of importance, it will help in the well-being of the employees. It will help ensuring, you know, everybody stays healthy. Okay. Cost efficiency. Unfortunately, at this time, we have to do a lot of less of spending, but when we do spend, we have to do it with less. So there are budget constraints. We need to work with the finance department. We need to work very closely on budget in different areas. I've mentioned that you have to use certain tools, online training, and so forth. So you need to do a lot of R&D in order to find what's the best solution at the least, you know, least cost. So keep that continuously in mind. At the end of the day, we are mediators between the business and the employees. So whatever we come up with, it needs to be very cost effective. And the best place to get this information is from the finance department. Okay. Another thing is the distributed authorities. I remember a time when we faced issues in Kuwait around 15 years back, I think now. or a bit more. We did this a Marshall model where we actually distributed the roles of communication and updating people on the situation that was happening. So I strongly would advise people on setting up strategies and distributing authorities. So, for instance, take it down to the HR department. If you do have a centralized boss, for example, and then you have different people working, especially if you're on regional level, multinationals, make sure that you give authority to your local entities and making decisions based on the regulations that are happening. Okay, feed employees information, staff through your marshal. So if you assign a marshal, for example, break down teams to 4 to 5. So this marshal will be responsible for these 4 to 5 people. Make it by locale, so regional. So if people live in the same area, then there will be a marshal. So make sure that you do the distribution. And when decision making is coming, everything should be channeled back into the platforms. You need to be very proactive in doing so. And this is where priority teams come in, because they would be the guidelines. They'll help in the guidelines, setting the guidelines. All right. So these are for HR strategies that you can use during this time. But looking into the future, looking into the post-COVID. Okay, we can look at obviously digital transformation and ensuring that everything is digitalized. We are coming into the era where data is important, so try to utilize the AI, artificial intelligence technology to read into your data, to grab the information. If you haven't, for instance, I've heard some companies don't have HRMSs until now. And at the same time, the first thing that they turned to was to go to an HRMS that would at least hold their information, because they can't get into the office, into the employee files and so forth. Okay. Another thing that you need to look into is how to cultivate the culture, how to nurture the culture, the continuous employee engagement. During this period, a lot of people have lost touch with their staff due to the situations. The communication needs to be encouraged. Once again, engagement, get your employees engaged. If you feel someone is slacking off, or if you feel that they're not performing, help them rather than scold them. Okay, so these are things that you need to set. Being at home, running remotely from home is totally different when you're coming back into the office. So it's going to be a shock. So be prepared for that. Be prepared to engage them back into, slowly phase them back into working in the office and so forth. Again, workplace flexibility. Some people would be scared, so be empathetic. So ensure that you have a policy for remote and working from the office. A lot of people would be happy to go back into the office, by the way. It's not easy to be working from home. A lot of distractions, a lot of usually a lot of us run away from home to work, to run from the stress from day-to-day life. Now you have day-to-day life, day-to-day work, all confined in these 4 walls, right? And you can't even go out. Another thing is employee upskilling. Put down training plans. Okay, how can we have skills improved? How can we encourage people to improve on different levels? You can even do cross-skilling. So areas where they don't usually work in, have them gain more experience in it. It will help, because whether we like it or not, we may face another crisis similar to this global. Maybe it might not be as global, it might be local, it might be regional. So we should be setting policies, and having learned from such a crisis, it should be documented, it should be strategized, you should have policies for it and so forth. All right. Last thing I want to touch on is the talent acquisition and rehiring policies. This is where the recruitment team needs to stay in touch with candidates. Although you're not hiring, make sure that you're in contact with people. I've seen companies who recently hired, prior to just the onset of the crisis, where people were during their probation period and they had to let them go. We've advised them to let them go in a very pleasant way, telling them that hopefully if things move forward, we will consider rehiring them. Employees that would have been let go again. We revisit our rehiring policies. Some companies have very strict rehiring policies pre-COVID-19. I would look into these rehiring policies, definitely. Okay. All right. I'm going to leave you with the last thing, which is HR practices. Okay, these are things that you should be doing, and you could be doing if you're not taking into consideration. Reassuring staff that your organization is mindful of the situation. Okay, let your staff know, be transparent, give them accurate information, guide them, direct them to the sources with the official information. I've seen employee handbooks revisited with COVID-19, tips and tricks and where to get things. So this is very important. Keeping in mind that you have to comply to government regulations and laws, respect curfew if set or if it's enforced, okay, and push forward for remote working, even if it's your first time. It's difficult for people to do it. Leaders and managers, get people, even if you have to get them up and tell them what they have to do. Wake up, do your sports. I've seen companies, for example, have the first thing that they have to do is they have this tool. The fitness tool where everybody has to be up and running at, for example, 9 o'clock, 5 minutes, 10 minutes exercise all together, and then they start working. So again, these are things that can be done at this time. Encouraging good hygiene. Again, people who are the frontliners, you need to ensure sanitization, even for the future. Okay, if you have high sanitization, there's a high possibility that people will not, have the dominant effect of the flu that walks into the office. Encourage them, guide them on even following through at home. When visiting, masks, gloves, wherever applicable, obviously. Okay. I have a 5-year-old daughter. Every time she's washing her hands, she's doing her 20-second, regimen. So make sure that everybody is aware of it. Again, don't assume that people are aware and that they've read something from some kind of online. Make sure that it is there. If people go to the office, make sure that it's there on the walls. Make sure that people understand, because if you have one healthy employee, then you want to make sure that everybody stays healthy. And if you have one infected employee, there's a big chance that other people will be infected. Okay. Again, I mentioned this earlier, being transparent, communicating with employees, updating health regulations on a regular basis. We've heard initially people said incubation period 14 days. Now we have people saying it's more than 14 days. I've just heard of a certain client had a case where the driver was infected, so the employee got infected. All right, so this is the regular person that drives him back and forth to work. So you can imagine, maybe if the person was a bit more aware and not so at ease, and trusting into who goes into this the car, the infection could have been avoided. Okay. Flexibility. Now, I know in certain countries there have been regulations where people cannot leave the house due to lockdown, but keep in mind that generally speaking, not everybody will be able to run and work from home. So not everybody will be able to communicate on the same level. Not everybody will be able to respond to you on the same level. So you need to have different ways of engaging with people, different levels of engagement. Some employees are initiative takers. Some employees need to be led. They're more followers. Some employees are resistant, are scared. Okay, so you need to have that flexibility. Okay, so, and just keep in mind that not one size fits all, unfortunately. So it's not something that you can implement and say, oh, this is the policy, you have to do it, because again, it's no longer about physical work or mental, it's emotional too. So the involvement of emotions, and a lot of people have lower emotional intelligence than they would like to admit. Okay. Lastly, last statement that I'd like everybody to just keep in mind is that we're all learning. Okay. As we go along, we look at different countries, we look at what governments are doing, we follow what the government's doing. But the upside of things is that fortunately, we're in an era where resources are easy to access. So you've got many resources that can guide you and assist you. You've got people that are experienced. It's easy for you to reach out to people with prior experience, even if it's on smaller scale. Come up with ideas and solutions, and based on your situation, based on your business, based on your insights, okay, of what you see. All right. And this basically is the end of my session. I'll be taking any questions from here on.
Thank you so much, May, for this insightful presentation. I think it's very great that we start looking at the strategies that we're using to adapt to this situation, not only at the short-term level, but the long-term view as well. I think it's very important that we're trying to think as well of what could happen after COVID-19. What could we do when we are starting somehow to go back to normal? And even if the situation kind of prolongs, what could happen in that type of condition? We'd like to open it up for questions from the audience. Feel free to type in your questions at the Q&A tab. But if you don't mind, I'm going to start with a question that I have, because you've mentioned these strategies that we can implement short-term, long-term. You've also talked about a little bit about the adjustment that needs to take place once the situation is over. Do you recommend that there has to be sort of a crisis management team that every organization has, kind of, you know, on ready mode all times in case something like this could happen again? Or, you know, just to make sure, because I think many organizations are learning that there are a lot of pitfalls and a lot of gaps in their response system to this, you know, unprecedented emergency. But many situations like this could happen again.
Definitely. Obviously, this crisis hit on global level. All right. So, as mentioned in my long-term HR strategies, is setting policies for black swan events. Okay. Basically, you need to be prepared for such situations. It could happen again. It could be on small scale. It could be on mid scale. A lot of companies have faced it, obviously, for example, during 2008, 2003, there was a whole war that was going on in this region. So obviously, crisis management teams have to be in existence. There has to be some sort of team that, or at least someone that handles that. And this is where I also mentioned, like you have in your priority teams. Okay, so these priority teams are people who actually look into reading into what's going to happen, creating different assumptions, different scenarios and situations. So having someone on the lookout is very important. It might not need to be a huge team, but at least someone has to be there looking into the different situations, and it is of utmost importance. With everything with globalization and travel being so easy nowadays, I mean, things move faster than we even know. Okay, so I hope that kind of answers your question.
Thank you so much. So we'll take a couple of audience questions, and we have a question from an anonymous attendee. When do you think hiring and recruitment will go back to normal again?
Okay. Now, right now, you know, as I direct the recruitment advisory line, I do see requests coming in. Okay, now it really depends on the business. Okay, once again, the level of impact that a business is set on really kind of regulates who does the you know, the recruitment and who doesn't. I mean, I've seen people nowadays looking for e-commerce specialists, looking for digital media specialists, looking for developers and so forth. So the actual norm, as in, for example, when do I hire a salesperson at a store? This will depend on the scenarios and when things are up and running and rolling. But if you ask me on a personal level, what do I see? I don't think that we are going to see normal recruitment and talent acquisition until probably the end of this year. But you will see that people will be hiring, companies will be looking at hiring people, but this is possibly either because they lose people due to the crisis, or for instance, the employees are not adapting to the new way of handling things and working. So at this time, if I was to say, when would I be able to recruit a salesperson? If you're in FMCG, you're lucky. If you're in luxury retail, I would say, let's wait a little bit longer. Okay, unfortunately.
You are correct, actually, and if I may add, we've seen in Bayt.com, for example, certain sectors and certain roles that actually increase their hiring during this period. So this also relates to which sector they actually fall under. If it's manufacturing, medical field, e-commerce, these sectors have been growing actually faster than the normal rate during the crisis, and then everything else also will kind of align with the progression of the pandemic and how governments are responding and how quickly they're reopening the economy up again. So we have another question about how do you balance cash flow and employees? So employees who are not productive but are culture fits. How do you balance the decision, I guess, on keeping them?
Again, this goes back to different situations. I've seen different clients handle different situations as per recommendation. There's this one particular client whose employees are in lockdown, but because of their culture fit, what they've done is they've put on a plan, again, based on the different scenarios, where initially they started paying complete salaries, then then they had to, plan B would be, to reduce the salaries for a certain period of time, but at the same time ensuring, for example, accommodation is provided, food allowance is provided, in certain situations. So it really depends on how you solve the overall situation. So it's not specific to just, oh, well, if this person is a culture fit and is not working and so forth. So that's not the situation. It needs to be on the bigger scale, bigger picture. Okay, so I can't tell you, for instance, oh yeah, keep the culture fit if they're fine, but whatever is being implemented on all levels needs to be implemented here too. Okay, so again, being empathetic, understanding the needs of people. If we were in different region, I would tell you, for example, welfare. Okay, is obviously there. We're in a situation now where we don't have welfare laws and guidelines. We're not. A lot of us are expats, so if you're not paying your rent, you're going to be kicked out. If you don't have money to eat, then you don't have. There's no background system that follows you through. So they're going to be looking up to their employers. So when you come up with a solution, it depends again on your situation, which scenario you're looking at, how impacted are you being conservative, are you being pessimistic, optimistic, and so forth. Okay. Sorry, I couldn't give a straight answer because I really need to understand the actual situation and the actual business. Okay.
All right, so we'll take just the last one more question because we are out of time. So for whenever hiring is taking place, if there is hiring going on currently, how do you recommend managing the interview process? And is the hiring process taking longer, even if a job opening is available and urgent?
If I was to tell you that jobs are urgent, urgency level now differs. Okay, previously we'd have people say, oh, I need someone hired today. Now hiring today is not, is no longer today. It's like within 2 weeks, 3 weeks time. But generally, when hiring people remotely, okay, it takes longer, okay, because more checks have to be done, more information has to be looked into. Usually when, for example, I have someone that comes in, I call them in for an interview, I can sit with them, I can understand a little bit more about what they're doing and where they're coming from, which companies they've worked in. Now, all this research has to be done prior, okay, when filtration and screening is being done. So there's more load on the recruiter to be able to filter the proper and shortlist. Okay, so you won't be usually the recruitment process would include like 2 to 3 interviews. Now it's going to be one and final interview. So before getting to that one and final interview, the recruiters have to actually do a lot of work and a lot of effort in sourcing information and in order to shortlist, and filter based on the requirements. So it will take a little bit longer than usual. Okay, and for methods of interviewing, obviously, we've got all these communication tools that we are heavily using. Okay.
Thank you, May. And for the same question also, let's keep in mind that there are, plenty of tools and technologies that are enabling companies also to do even their interviewing, their onboarding fully online. So in Bayt.com, for example, we have Evaluify after hire to do these processes that are typically very cumbersome and lengthy, and they require physical presence. But still, nowadays, maybe there is that period of adjustment to this new approach that may take time also, which is why we may be seeing this kind of prolonged hiring process. Well, thank you so much, May, for this wonderful session. And I hope everyone who joined us got some great insights and tips that apply to their industries as well. We will keep a recording of this session as well as a presentation available on the vFairs platform. So anyone can refer back to it in the future.
Okay, thank you for your time.
Thank you so much, May. Have a good day and stay safe.
You too. Stay safe. Take care.